Ethan's gaze lingered on the itinerary his wife Rachel had printed and left carelessly on the dining table. Her upcoming work trip to Denver seemed meticulously planned, but something about it felt off. It wasn't just the itinerary itself, but the faint perfume of secrecy that clung to her recent behavior. For years, Ethan had prided himself on his methodical approach to life. At 42, he had built a career as a private investigator, a job that demanded keen attention to detail and a nose for inconsistencies. Yet nothing in his professional life prepared him for the eerie realization that the person who might be deceiving him was his own wife. Rachel was 38 and worked as an account executive for a prestigious marketing firm. Ambitious, polished, and articulate, she had climbed the ladder swiftly, often dazzling clients and coworkers alike. Ethan had admired her determination until recently, when that ambition began to take on a shadowed edge. Late nights at the office, vague explanations, and a guarded phone that was never far from her grasp had created cracks in the foundation of their marriage. Ethan's instincts buzzed when he scanned the details of her itinerary. A stay at the Fairview Plaza Hotel, top-tier luxury he knew her firm wouldn't normally authorize. Then there was the dinner reservation for two at Savor, an intimate restaurant known for romantic ambience, not corporate networking. She preferred not spending the night. He went back to her receipts from past trips, a charge at a spa during what was supposed to be a conference, late-night room service for two from the same hotel she claimed to have stayed alone. Individually, these details were harmless, but together, they painted a troubling picture. That evening, Rachel was in their bedroom packing her bags, humming softly to herself. Ethan leaned in the doorway, studying her movements. "Busy week ahead?" he asked casually, trying to keep his voice steady. Rachel turned, her smile quick but strained. "Oh, you know how these things are. Back-to-back meetings, client dinners. I'll barely have time to breathe." Her words were a little too rehearsed, her tone overly cheerful. Ethan nodded, offering no indication of his suspicion. "Anything I can help with?" Ethan asked. "No, I've got it all under control." She zipped her suitcase with a flourish. "You know me, always organized." Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes as he left the room. His chest felt tight, not from anger, but from a profound sense of betrayal. If his hunch was correct, Rachel wasn't just lying about work. She was sharing her time, her thoughts, and perhaps more with someone else. He opened his laptop in his home office and started gathering the tools of his trade. The truth, he knew, would either be his salvation or his undoing, but he was determined to find it, no matter how deeply it was buried. In the quiet of the night, Ethan's mind raced with questions. Did she think he was too trusting, too preoccupied to notice? Did she believe she could balance her affair and her career indefinitely? If so, she had underestimated him, and he wasn't about to let that slide. Ethan's hands trembled as he powered on the external hard drive containing software he hadn't used in years. His private investigator days were behind him, or so he'd thought. Tonight, however, his expertise wasn't being used for a client, but for his own life. His heart ached with a sick mix of determination and dread. The first step was subtle. He retrieved Rachel's phone while she showered. He didn't need to crack any passwords. Rachel's trust in his disinterest worked in his favor. Navigating to her email, he noticed nothing unusual at first, until he scrolled further. Beneath mundane work correspondence, there was a thread that made his stomach turn. "Looking forward to Denver. Can't wait to see you. R." It was signed with just an initial M. Ethan quickly photographed the emails on his own phone before returning hers. He told himself to breathe, to act as if nothing had changed. But the floodgates had opened. The missing puzzle pieces started to connect in his mind. Late-night meetings, an accidental overbooking at their anniversary dinner 3 months ago, and that time she'd returned from a conference with a new necklace she'd claimed was a client gift. Oh, he needed more. Confrontation wasn't Ethan's style. Not until he had the kind of proof that could silence any denials. He remembered his old tools of the trade, surveillance apps, discrete cameras, and even his collection of contacts from his PI days. He started with her social media accounts, noticing a private album on her cloud backup. After bypassing it using her laptop, he was greeted with photos of Rachel. laughing with a man at what seemed to be a rooftop bar. The man had a boyish smile and a tailored suit, a coworker, perhaps, though he couldn't place him. Ethan saved the photos and closed the computer before Rachel could notice anything amiss. The man handed her the monster, made a comment about the ratio and then all of a sudden, that monster was gone. The next step was to gather external validation. Ethan contacted Angela, an old friend and fellow investigator. They'd worked cases together years ago, and she was one of the few people he trusted implicitly. I need some surveillance help, he said, explaining the situation without revealing the full depth of his hurt. Are you sure you're ready for what you might find? Angela's voice was gentle. Sometimes it's better not to know. And no, Ethan replied firmly. I need the truth. Angela didn't hesitate. Within hours, she set up a discreet GPS tracker on Rachel's car and activated a keylogger on her work laptop. Meanwhile, Ethan installed a small motion-activated camera in the kitchen aimed at the entrance. If Rachel met her mystery man in their home, he'd know. By the end of the week, the evidence started to flow. Rachel's GPS showed her car parked at a boutique hotel several nights after work. Angela sent him photos taken by a covert camera outside the building. The man in the suit was there, holding Rachel's hand, leading her inside with an intimacy that burned Ethan to his core. He turned to think about it. He also found receipts, more damning than he'd anticipated. A dinner for two at an expensive restaurant on a night Rachel claimed she'd worked late. A spa reservation under her name, but with services for two listed. Ethan stared at the growing pile of proof, his emotions swinging wildly between grief and cold resolve. But it wasn't until Angela shared the audio recordings from a bugged phone call that the betrayal struck him like a sledgehammer. Rachel's voice was light, teasing. I can't wait to see you in Denver, Mike. It'll be just us this time. No excuses, no rushing, he said, as she announced her departure. The three men approached the camp and watched her. I can use your help, Rachel said. Ethan sank into his chair, the room spinning around him. He had his proof. Rachel's affair was no passing fling. It was a carefully orchestrated double life. He thought back to the vows they'd made, the life they'd built. Now it all felt like a lie. But if Rachel thought she could continue her deception without consequences, she had underestimated the meticulous nature of the man she had married. Ethan wasn't just preparing for a confrontation, he was preparing to dismantle her facade entirely. The dinner table was set, the aroma of garlic roasted chicken filling the room. Ethan had spent the better part of the day meticulously crafting the environment, ensuring nothing would tip Rachel off. He was calm, composed, a man hosting a regular evening with his wife. But beneath the surface, a storm raged. Rachel arrived home later than expected, her tone apologetic but breezy. Sorry, traffic was awful, she said, tossing her purse onto the couch. No worries, Ethan replied smoothly, his voice giving away nothing. Dinner's ready. Thought we could sit and eat together for a change? Rachel smiled, though it seemed slightly strained. Ethan noticed the faint flush of her cheeks, the overly cheerful tone she used when she was nervous. That sounds nice. Let me just freshen up. As she disappeared into the bedroom, Ethan straightened the stack of photos on the edge of the dining table. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, imagining every reaction, every possible defense she might offer. His determination solidified with each scenario. When Rachel returned, she wore her usual charming smile, but Ethan caught the way her eyes darted around the room. He gestured for her to sit, and they began eating in silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound between them. Halfway through the meal, Ethan set his fork down and cleared his throat. Rachel, he began, his tone calm but deliberate. Do you think your boss knows what you're really doing on these work trips? Tilly shrugged. I don't think he knows, he said, laughing. The question hung in the air like an electric charge. Rachel froze, her glass of wine midway to her lips. She blinked, then laughed nervously. What do you mean? She said. She gulped and looked away from him. They dismissed me. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the stack of photos and slid them across the table. The images fanned out, each one telling a story Rachel could no longer deny. Her hand trembled as she picked up the top photo, a candid shot of her and Mike, laughing over dinner at a boutique hotel. Ethan, she began, but he raised a hand to stop her. I've been patient, he said, his voice tight. I've given you every chance to tell me the truth, but instead I had to piece it together myself. These aren't business trips, Rachel. They're rendezvous with him. I never courted him, said Rachel. Rachel's face turned ashen, her confident demeanor crumbling. I can explain, she stammered, her words tumbling over each other. She basically told Rachel that she'd failed in a lot of ways, trying to enforce the idea of the laws. Explain what? Ethan shot back, his calm facade slipping just slightly. That you've been sneaking around with Mike for months? That you lied to my face over and over? Tears welled in Rachel's eyes, but Ethan wasn't moved. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Go ahead, Rachel. Explain it to me. I'm listening. Rachel took a shaky breath, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't supposed to happen. It started with lunches, harmless conversations. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Lunches? Harmless? You expect me to believe that when I have evidence of hotel stays, spa visits, and phone calls filled with promises, don't insult me. Rachel flinched but pressed on. Ethan, I swear, I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. Believe you? Ethan said with a bitter laugh. I believed you every time you told me you were working late. Every time you came home with a new excuse, I believed you. And look where that got me. Rachel's tears spilled over, but Ethan refused to soften. Do you know what it's like to doubt everything you thought was true? He continued. To wonder if every smile, every kiss, every moment we shared was real? I built my life around you, Rachel, and you shattered it. The room fell silent. Rachel buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. Said Ethan softly. 7 years, dirty 4 years, dirty 4 years. There's more, he said, his tone now cold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, playing the audio recording of her call with Mike. Rachel's voice filled the room, playful, intimate, and damning. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. You recorded me? You gave me no choice, Ethan replied. I needed the truth, and now I have it. Rachel's expression shifted from guilt to desperation. Ethan, please, let me fix this. I'll end it with him. I swear I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Ethan shook his head, his resolve unshaken. You can't undo this, Rachel. The damage is done. I can't trust you anymore, and without trust, there's nothing left. Rachel reached across the table, her voice pleading. Ethan, don't throw everything away. We've built a life together. Don't let one mistake ruin it. Mistake? Ethan repeated, his voice rising. This wasn't a mistake, Rachel. It was a choice, a series of choices. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our marriage. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm filing for divorce, he said, his tone final. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You can stay here tonight, but I expect you to find somewhere else by the weekend. Rachel crumpled into her seat, her sobs echoing in the quiet room. Ethan turned and walked away, his heart heavy but resolute. He had confronted the truth, faced the betrayal head on, and now he was ready to take the first step toward reclaiming his life. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Ethan knew one thing for certain. He deserved better than lies. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway of his lawyer's office, a stark reminder of the new chapter he was about to enter. It was a pristine space, all glass and polished wood, yet it felt impersonal, much like the paperwork waiting for him inside. When he entered the conference room, his lawyer, Margaret Klein, gestured toward a chair. Ethan, good to see you, she said, her tone professional yet kind. She had handled cases like his before, and Ethan appreciated her no-nonsense demeanor. He sat down, running a hand through his hair. Let's get this over with. Margaret opened a folder containing the documents they'd reviewed in their last meeting. You've already authorized the formal complaint for divorce, citing infidelity. This ensures you have a strong legal position, especially given the evidence you provided. She looked up, her gaze firm. Are you ready for the next steps? This process can be exhausting. Ethan nodded. I've been living in a lie long enough. It's time to end it. The professional fallout. The first ripple of consequences hit Rachel and Mike at work. Ethan had been methodical in deciding how to proceed, ensuring his actions wouldn't backfire legally. After consulting with Margaret, he submitted the evidence anonymously to Rachel's boss and the HR department of her firm. Throughout the episode, Rachel and Ethan discussed their future, what use of her reputation to keep us up. Within days, the professional facade Rachel had carefully constructed began to crumble. Ethan learned through mutual acquaintances that her boss, a man with a reputation for integrity, was furious. An affair with a subordinate, he had reportedly exclaimed during a team meeting. This isn't just unethical, it compromises the reputation of this entire firm. Mike, being Rachel's subordinate, bore the brunt of the fallout. HR's investigation was swift and thorough, uncovering not only their affair, but also inappropriate use of company funds, the receipts Ethan had collected, a spa day, intimate dinners at high-end restaurants, were expenses client development. Mike's terminated, Margaret informed Ethan over the phone. Rachel's been demoted and placed on probation. Her reputation's in tatters. Ethan felt no joy in hearing the news, only a grim satisfaction. This wasn't revenge, it was accountability. They had played with fire, and now they were burned. Chapter 8, The Personal Fallout. Back at home, Rachel was packing her belongings. The woman who had once seemed so poised now appeared small. Her shoulders slumped as she folded her clothes into a suitcase. Ethan watched from the doorway, his arms crossed. I didn't think it would end like this, Rachel murmured, her voice hoarse from crying. Neither did I, Ethan replied, his tone devoid of warmth. Rachel turned to face him, her eyes red and swollen. Do you really hate me that much? She said. Ethan hesitated. Hate wasn't the right word. No, he said finally. I don't hate you, Rachel. I just can't trust you, and without trust, there's no foundation for us to rebuild. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I deserve this, she whispered. Ethan didn't argue. Instead, he stepped aside, letting her pass. When the front door closed behind her, the silence in the house was deafening. Moving forward. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began to reclaim his life. He spent more time with friends, people he'd neglected during the years he was too focused on his marriage to notice the cracks forming. His best friend, Mark, dragged him out for a round of golf, insisting it was just what the doctor ordered. You've been through hell, man, Mark said as they walked the course. But you're here, and that's what matters. One day at a time. Ethan nodded, grateful for the simplicity of their camaraderie. He didn't share everything that was on his mind, but being around people who cared was a balm to his fractured soul. He also threw himself into his work, taking on cases with renewed vigor. There was something therapeutic about solving problems for others, even as he was still piecing together his own life. One night, while reviewing case notes in his quiet home office, he felt a flicker of hope, a realization that the pain, though sharp now, wouldn't last forever. It won't be all right, Rachel's new reality. Rachel's life, meanwhile, had taken a sharp turn. Her demotion meant longer hours and reduced pay, and the whispering among her co-workers was unbearable. Her affair with Mike had made her a pariah in the office, and even the clients she'd once charmed now kept their distance. Mike, too, was struggling. After losing his job, he had few prospects. His wife had left him upon discovering the affair, and his reputation was in ruins. The thrill of their forbidden romance had given the way to a grim reality neither had anticipated. Though Rachel tried to reach out to Ethan several times, he never responded. Her texts went unread, her voicemails unanswered. She couldn't blame him. She had betrayed him in the worst way. Closure. Months later, Ethan received a final email from Rachel. It was brief, but heartfelt. I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. You didn't deserve this. I hope you find happiness. You deserve that too. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time before closing the email without replying. He didn't need to. His closure had come not from Rachel's apology, but from his own strength in facing the truth and rebuilding his life. As he sat in his living room, sipping a cup of coffee, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. He had lost something precious, but in the process, he had gained something even more valuable. Clarity, resilience, and the determination to move forward. Ethan stepped into the sunlight of a crisp autumn morning, the kind that hinted at change. The past months had been tumultuous, but now, for the first time in what felt like years, he could breathe deeply without the weight of betrayal pressing on his chest. His divorce from Rachel was finalized last week, and he'd taken the day off to reflect on what lay ahead. The house, once a battleground of unspoken doubts and hidden truths, was quieter now. Ethan had spent weeks reconfiguring it, not just physically, but emotionally. The living room was free of Rachel's carefully curated decor, replaced with simpler furnishings Ethan had chosen himself. The kitchen, where her laughter used to fill the air, now bore the hum of a coffee maker and the occasional chatter of friends he'd started inviting over, rebuilding himself. Ethan leaned heavily on routines as a means of rebuilding. Mornings began with a run around the park, a ritual he'd abandoned during the latter years of his marriage. The rhythm of his footsteps on the pavement and the cool air against his skin became a form of meditation. It was during one of these runs that he realized he wasn't just moving forward physically, he was doing so emotionally too. He also sought solace in his work. As a private investigator, Ethan had always been good at solving puzzles. Now, with the clarity his personal ordeal had given him, he found himself more attuned to his client's struggles. When a woman hired him to uncover the truth about her husband's suspected infidelity, Ethan approached the case with a newfound compassion. He wasn't just an investigator anymore. He was someone who truly understood what it meant to face betrayal head on. But his healing wasn't all about work and routine. Ethan reconnected with old friends, rekindling relationships he'd let slide during his marriage. Mark, his closest friend, became a regular fixture in his life again, often dragging Ethan to casual poker nights or impromptu barbecues. "You look like a new man," Mark said one evening, handing Ethan a beer. "Like you finally dropped the dead weight." Ethan chuckled. "Something like that. It's not just Rachel, though. It's all the lies, the pretending. It was eating me alive." Ben started down the trail. Rachel's regrets. Rachel's life, meanwhile, had taken a different trajectory. The professional fallout from her affair had left her career in shambles. Her demotion had led to strained finances, and the stigma among her colleagues meant every meeting and client interaction was fraught with tension. In her personal life, Rachel was adrift. Her affair with Mike had fizzled as quickly as it had started. Stripped of the allure of secrecy and excitement, their relationship couldn't withstand the harsh light of reality. Mike, jobless and embittered, had grown resentful of her. They parted ways after one too many arguments about who had ruined whose life. Rachel often found herself thinking about Ethan, about the life they had built and how she had taken it for granted. She sent messages now and then, apologies, pleas for forgiveness, but Ethan never responded. She couldn't blame him, forging a new path. Ethan didn't ignore Rachel's attempts at contact out of spite. He simply knew it was better for both of them to move on. Responding would reopen wounds that were finally starting to heal. Instead, he focused on the future. He started attending local events and workshops, things he'd always wanted to do but had never prioritized. At a photography class, he met Emma, a freelance journalist with a quick wit and an infectious laugh. They struck up an easy friendship, sharing stories about their careers and the intricacies of human nature. It was refreshing, Ethan realized, to connect with someone without the shadow of doubt lurking in the background. Emma wasn't a replacement for Rachel, nor was she meant to be. She was simply someone who brought light into his world when he'd been navigating darkness for so long. A life reclaimed. On a brisk November afternoon, Ethan stood on a hill overlooking the park where he often ran. The city stretched out before him, vibrant and alive. For the first time in years, he felt like he was truly part of it again. He thought back to the man he had been before Rachel's betrayal, the trusting husband, the man who believed in the sanctity of promises. That man wasn't gone, Ethan realized. He had just evolved. Betrayal had tested him, yes, but it hadn't broken him. It had forced him to confront his own resilience, to strip away illusions and rebuild from the ground up. And while the scars of what he'd endured would always remain, they didn't define him. Ethan turned away from the view and began walking back toward his home, his pace steady and unhurried. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face it head on. After all, he'd already survived the worst. Everything else was just the next step.